All right, we're getting indications from Republicans now that that wall against having confirmation hearings on the president's choice to replace Supreme Court Justice Scalia, who died over the weekend, well, they realize, as we try to point out on this show, they still control the majority, and they can vote down the president's choice. But not to hold the hearings, I thought, made them look boxed in more. And then there's the issue of, once they have the hearings, whether the nominee that the president is proposing is the nominee who history suggests is what the president thinks he is, whether Republican or Democrat. We've learned from choices in the past that they're not quite the guy that was thought to be the case. I think it was Dwight Eisenhower who famously said of Earl Warren, biggest damn mistake of my life, choosing him for the court, because he veered to the left. At the time, that was Eisenhower's view of things, so they could change. We had Historian Burt Folsom with us right now. Burt, how likely is that? I mean, obviously people's opinions and views evolve. Conservatives are still scratching their heads over what they got with Justice Roberts, but what do you think the threat is of someone who's presented to a committee, to the Senate, as not being what they thought?
Well, you're right, Neil. That has happened in the past. Eisenhower was very disappointed with having appointed Earl Warren to the Supreme Court, and Brennan, too.
Right.
Nixon had some bad choices with Blackmun and Powell, and of course Kennedy has been unreliable, who was Reagan's choice. So we've seen that, but it's primarily been Republicans in recent years. The Democrats have not had a failed appointment. That is, an appointment where the president was unsatisfied with the voting record, since Harry Truman. In the steel seizure case of 1952, he was very upset with Tom Clark, who voted against him on that case. But that was 1952. The Democratic appointees have been very reliably liberal since then. And that, of course, is what the Republicans...
Do you think that President Obama would submit a reliably liberal name? Because to Republicans, at least to a man and woman, they say that's a non-starter. But what do you think?
Right. Yes, I think that President Obama would be unlikely to appoint someone who he was not confident would be voting with his views on a regular basis.
But views change, right? Views change. You mentioned largely with Republican picks, but to your point, now and then some Democratic picks. But don't they just try, when they come to before a committee, especially if it's a committee of an opposing party, to suit themselves and their temperament for that committee, to sound vanilla, to sound vague, so that they can't be pinned down? It doesn't always work, obviously. It didn't work for Justice Bork and what have you. But what do you make of that?
Yes, that is a tradition, and David Souter, who was President Bush's appointee, was very vague. Ted Kennedy would ask him, you know, what did you think about Roe v. Wade? And he'd say, well, I don't recall having a thought on that decision. He was very vague, and he turned out to be very disappointing to President Bush, unlike Clarence Thomas.
So play this out for me. I've been a big believer that you should hold the hearings. The president's going to be around for another 11 months. It looks childish if you don't.
Yes.
And then if I guess Republicans are afraid if they hold the hearings and a moderate is presented to them, they look really, really childish if they reject such a moderate. But I think they look more childish if they don't even hold the hearings. What do you think?
That is a point. One other thing to consider is that would put some Republicans on record opposing the nominee, and Republican senators running in blue states, like Senator Johnson in Wisconsin, might have a difficult time in their re-election campaign if they were put on record.
Supreme Court justice vote?
It's possible. At least the other side would use that against them in the campaign.
I see. All right, Professor, we'll see how it sorts out. But, you know, the candidate you're given isn't always the candidate you'd think. But people can change. We'll watch how it goes, Professor. Again, those of you on the right or left on this issue, my only view was there is a process for this. Let's see how it goes. You don't like the name that the president submits, you're free to reject them. But if you don't hold the hearings, you look even more obstinate, more petulant, more childish. I'm just saying, right around now, the attitude in Washington, that is the last thing you want. Stick around.